Well, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here this morning. I will let you know first thing, I am wired up. Not because of caffeine, but because literally I have just recently come across two hearing aids that I wear now. And I had lost my right earring for like 15 years ago. And my son convinced me to get some hearing aids. Dad, time to get some hearing aids. What'd you say? So I got some hearing aids. So on my right ear, I've got a hearing aid. I have this contraption here that supports the microphone. And now I'm going to put glasses on. So I am wired up. So if something happens up here, smoke starts happening, that's okay. Just so you know ahead of time. But if things begin falling off my ear, we got some problems. So, all right. Appreciate Colton asking me to step in today for that. And spending some time in the Gospel of Mark is where we're going to focus our attention today, and I want you to join me there. And I think the passage will be up on the screen in just a moment. But just recently, I added my name to a very unique list that contains thousands and thousands of others like myself. Some of you are on that list too. Most of you here this morning are not on that list. You are not privileged enough to be included in this great world called Medicare. But given enough time, you will be, okay? Your name will appear on that list as well. I just turned 65 back in April, and now I'm getting all the mail and all that kind of stuff, and sign up, and I just want to live, But yeah, I'm just welcome to Medicare not too long ago. So with that in mind, I just got a few thoughts I want to share with you regarding health. So let me share a few of those with you. Health nuts are going to feel stupid someday, lying in hospitals, dying of nothing. All of you who really value your health, By the way, that's from Red Fox. If you know Red Fox, your name is on the Medicare list, okay? If you're not on that list, you won't know who he is. But he started Sanford & Son, the old TV comedy show, years and years ago. How about this one? Quit worrying about your health. It'll go away. Thanks to Robert Orban for that. How about this one? Isn't it a bit unnerving that doctors call what they do a practice? Think about that one. I'm going to practice on you, How about the real thing here, practices is the real thing. That's from George Carlin. A couple of more for you. My doctor recently told me that jogging could add years to my life. I think he was right. I can feel 10 years older already. Milton Berle. And then the last one by a famous baseball player, Mickey Mantle. He said, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. Isn't that true? How's your health today? How's it going for you? You feel every day the creaks in your joints? Do you have the energy level that you had when you were 15 years old? And where are you in your health? Well, strangely, it might seem to you, I'm going to address this situation, but maybe not at the perspective that you're thinking. But in Mark chapter 2, and as Colton has spent several weeks in the Gospel of Mark, be looking at that, and I want you to go to verse 13 of chapter 2, and we'll see what he says about this issue of health. We'll bring it to you in here in a minute. So if you'll kind of follow along with me, I'm assuming that this is the ESV version. I didn't clarify that, but anyway, we'll follow along. I'll just read from this, actually, because mine's a little different. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. And as he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. And while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house. Many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And when the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." I'd like to take a few moments to kind of set this up for you. And I left my watch uncharged up at home, so I'm going to have to use my phone as my time frame. But I'd like to bring out some issues, perhaps, in the passage that will help guide our understanding of what Jesus is dealing with and what he's trying to get across here. Let me give you some background just real quickly, even though it's not on there. Just if you'll back up in your mind from what was covered last week in the background of things, Jesus had just finished his miraculous work of healing the paralytic man. Do you remember that? The guys who dropped him down through the rooftop and the crowd of people that were in the small house there, which led to his encounter with the Pharisees who questioned his authority to forgive sins. He then leaves, after that encounter, he then leaves and proceeds toward the Sea of Galilee, where he spends time teaching the crowd that was coming to him. And it's likely that in that crowd, by the sea, perhaps were some of those who had witnessed the miracle of the paralytic man being healed, and some others along the way that had heard rumor of what has been going on, and they were curious. And of course, how could you leave out the scribes and the Pharisees? They were there too. It was after teaching this crowd that Jesus departs and heads back toward Capernaum, where he had just been, where he passes by the tax booth occupied by Levi. You know him better as Matthew. Matthew. Who was Matthew? You know, we know him as one of the disciples, right? But it's probably the most part, the extent that we know of his background, of who he was. Matthew was a publican, a tax collector, which was a despised profession in Palestine because such men were viewed as traitors. As traitors. Tax collectors were Jews who had acquired, if you want to call it, a tax franchise from the Roman government. And you know the Roman government really taxed heavily those and who they were given charge over. And so any amount that was collected over what Rome had already required, these guys were allowed to keep. So they could add more to the tax code, if you will. As long as Rome received what they were requiring, these tax collectors could tax whatever they wanted to. It could be any number of things. And they could just sweep it right off the top, put it in their pocket, and they became wealthy off their own people. Understandably, they were despised and hated by their people. So you have to understand that setting, okay? They were despised. And as Matthew sat in that tax booth, day after day, these Jews would walk by and look at him out of the corner of their eye. "You sorry dog. You traitor." Mumbled under their breath. Perhaps they even decide to walk to the other side of the street so as to being too close to Matthew. And as he walked on by the tax booth, perhaps he cast a sarcastic glance back his way just to get their point across. "Hate you for what you do to us. You take our money. You live in a big fancy house, and we're doing the best we can to make ends meet, and you steal from us, and you call yourself a Jew?" He wasn't well liked. He wasn't well accepted. And he's sitting there in this tax booth. That's who Matthew is. But there are three things that I want to cover in the text overall in this that we've seen in the passage here. I see in the passage that there's an invitation that's given, followed by an inquisition, followed by the third thing, which is an indictment. So I want to go over those things with you. So if you kind of follow along with me, I'd like to put up the verses in verse 14 and 15 to draw your attention back to that. Let's talk about this invitation for just a minute, okay? So here's the scene. As Jesus has just finished teaching by the Sea of Galilee, he's walking back toward Capernaum, he passes by Matthew sitting in the tax booth. And as he passed by, the verse says, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting in the tax booth, and said to him, follow me. I wonder how surprised Matthew must have been. How many times had he sat in that booth and watched people go around him, not just the Jews, but anybody who had to pay taxes? I mean, wouldn't you drive 6 or 7 blocks to go around the IRS, so you don't even have to look at the sign on the side of the building? Of course. No one likes to pay taxes. So Matthew has gotten used to this, being shunned, being mocked and ridiculed because he deserved it maybe, And as Jesus passed by the tax booth, maybe Matthew noticed that this guy didn't cross the street. And Jesus goes by and maybe he just kind of stops and turns and looks in the little tax booth, whatever it might have looked like, and just kind of looks at Matthew. Matthew's right down to the ledger, counting his money like Scrooge and all the coins and whatever else that looks like. And looks back up and Jesus maybe is still standing there. Turns his chair a little bit, starts working this way so he doesn't have to see Jesus. Jesus is still standing there. Matthew's getting bothered by now, maybe. Who is this guy? Is he going to rob me? Look at Roman soldiers everywhere on the tax booth. He can't do that. What's he want? He's not saying anything. Just silence. And all of a sudden, 2 words. He doesn't introduce himself as Jesus, as the Messiah. He doesn't have a conversation with Matthew. Doesn't try to reach through the barred window there and shake his hand. He just said, follow me. That's it. Matthew, what's that? But if you notice in the text, Matthew doesn't even respond back. He doesn't even say anything. When Jesus walks by, it says, follow me, and he rose and followed him. How cool is that? No questions asked. No, well, hold on. Let's get some information from you before I start following you. I don't even know who you are. No, it seems that Matthew just closed up the books, put his pens down, maybe shuffled a couple of coins in a bag, opened the door, and followed him. That was it. Highly unusual, wouldn't you think? And he follows him. The passage goes on, and as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. I want to take just a minute just to kind of describe this idea of following Jesus in this particular context. What does it mean that Matthew followed Jesus? Well, there's a couple of terms here, but here it simply means that he accompanied Jesus on his way to his house. Now, there are other passages that seem to indicate to be a follower of Christ. Okay? Means you change your lifestyle to that of Jesus Christ. You walk in the path that he walks, and you want to be like Jesus. There certainly is that idea in the scriptures, but here in this particular situation, it simply says he closed his books, he got up and he followed him to his house, to Matthew's house. I can't help but wonder, because Matthew doesn't say to Jesus, well, where are we going? He just follows him. And so where was Jesus going? Jesus is going to Matthew's house. Matthew doesn't know he's going to his house. He's walking, he's just turned right. That's where my house is. That's strange. Keeps on walking, and he takes a left at the palm tree, and his house is just right there. This is weird. And he follows him to his house. I wonder what Matthew was thinking. How did this happen? How does he even know where I live? So he reclined at the table in his house, and there's this huge gathering of people. Somewhere along the way, Matthew must have sent out invitations because there's a party planned now. So he simply means that he got up and followed him. Curiosity, perhaps. Somebody walks by and says, follow me. Okay. What's this about? And follows into his house. But what happened at his house resulted in a changed life. So who was in attendance at Matthew's house? Well, the passage says many, get the term many, tax collectors and sinners. Don't you love that? There's got to be some part in you that says, that's just so cool. Not church. Not guys who are, have their own personal Bible studies and things like that. These are tax collectors, the worst of the worst. And the sinners were there. You know, these guys were depraved. They were detestable. Maybe the only friends they had were each other. Have you thought about that? The only common thing that these guys had in mind, they're all tax collectors, they're all traitors, and they all made money off of people incorrectly and unfairly. So they kind of stuck together. So you got this whole house full of tax collectors. The word got around that Matthew is following somebody. He followed his house, and who is this guy? They had heard rumors about Jesus. They had just earlier had been witnesses to what had occurred at the healing of the paralytic man. And now he's going to Matthew's house. Maybe they were the only friends they had. What do you think of the conversation around the table? I kind of envision a party, right? I do. You're kind of raucous guys in there, hooplaying and doing whatever else and playing pin the tail on the donkey of whatever tax collectors do. I don't know. But I know it was a fun time. I think they were having a good time together because they didn't have the opportunity very much to associate with people. Maybe they're taking advantage of the time. So in the midst of this setting in Matthew's house, being run over with tax collectors and sinners, and Jesus and a few of his disciples, because not all of his disciples were on the list yet. Maybe 6, 7 were together at this point, because Matthew hadn't even really been called yet. So there's a few of his disciples that were there. We're in the middle of all these guys that no one liked. That brings me to verse 16, the Inquisition. That was the invitation. Let's look at the Inquisition here. In verse 16, and the scribes of the Pharisees. It's an interesting phrase because there were different types of scribes that worked for different groups of people. The scribes in this group worked specifically with the Pharisees and for the Pharisees. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? They were bothered by this, deeply bothered by this. So there's the Inquisition. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Does he not know who these people are? I mean, I know Jesus is kind of new on the scene, but he has no idea who he's hanging around with. Somebody needs to tell him who these guys are. The disciples were there as well. Three issues to consider in the Inquisition is the context itself. Jesus was there eating with these guys. Huge meal had been prepared. And they were reclining at the table. I guess if you were a left-handed person, you could have some real problems when reclining at a table if everyone else is right-handed. Your feet would be going the wrong way. You kind of prop yourself on your elbow. Your feet would be laying this way behind the next person, kind of away from the table. Someone else would be like right here, propped up, and they're just grabbing off the table and eating. But if you're left-handed, your back's now toward the table. Your feet are going the wrong way. Could be a hard time. No chairs there, but they were reclining and they were eating at the table and enjoying each other, having a great time. A lot of noise going on. The company that was there were the sinners and the tax collectors, and then there's the challenge. Why is he doing this? They challenged him. Just like they challenged him back at the house with the paralytic man. They're there again. Why is he doing this? Let's talk about the context for just a minute then. If you lived in the New Testament world of the Pharisees, then eating was a major issue to think about. They took it very seriously. Where you and I, we tend to go through, I know if I go to eat something and I've been working on whatever, lawnmower, whatever, my hands a little dirty, sometimes I forget to wash my hands. I just sit at the table, start to eat. 5-second rule or something, it's okay. Dirt's not attached yet. Not in the New Testament. No. You got to wash your hands. You'll break the law if you don't wash your hands before you eat. Unwashed hands. Washing of pots and cups. Oftentimes, I don't know about you, but I'll take a cup and I'll fill it up with water, drink it, set it down, and about 5 minutes later, I'll put Coke in there. I'll fill up something else later on. I keep that cup on the counter for 3 or 4 days. Don't tell what grows out of us sometimes. I don't know what's happened at times, but they took the washing of pots and their utensils and things very seriously. Unclean. Can't have anything clean going inside. Jesus deals with that at another time. We don't know what kind of food Matthew had prepared for his friends, for Jesus and his disciples, but I know what kind of food I enjoy at the gathering of friends. Give me some smoked up St. Louis ribs, smoked brisket, baked beans, coleslaw, all that good stuff. Sometimes just good old fried chicken, just hits the spot. I don't know what kind of food he had, but he had a lot of it. But the company that he was with is where the really irritation comes in for these Pharisees. It's interesting that if you look at the passage closely, Jesus wasn't being questioned over what he was eating. He was being questioned over who he was eating with. That's where the problem was. They check mark, okay, he's eating the right types of things here that won't violate the law, but that's not what we're looking for anyway. It's who he's eating with was really what set them off. And then within the challenge, when they see he's eating with tax collectors and tax collectors and sinners, just the opposite of Pharisees, this is where Luke records the same event in Luke chapter 5, verse 30. So I'm going to read that passage about the challenge itself from the Pharisees when they say, why is he doing this? Luke 5:30 says it this way, and the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Grumbled. It doesn't say that in the Mark passage, but it does in the Luke passage. Grumbled. It's actually an onomatopoeia, okay? Which is simply a word that's supposed to mimic the sound. Like when you say meow, you're mimicking a sound that a cat would make, right? It's kind of the idea. They were grumbling, and the sound of what they were saying to the disciples sounded like grumbling. You couldn't really make it out, except maybe the disciples heard it, but maybe no one else, because so much noise was in the room. It sounded like they were grumbling at his disciples. Why do you eat with tax collectors and sinners? The question posed by the scribes and the Pharisees indicate that this is a rhetorical question, by the way. A rhetorical question. They didn't intend for it to be answered. They just kind of brought him in and said, why is he doing this? They didn't want an answer. They only wanted to grumble and complain. They didn't want an answer. In their minds, they already had the answer. If they truly wanted an answer, they would have asked the question in a true interrogative way. I would like an answer when a question is really intended to find an answer. But they didn't ask that kind of question. It was rhetorical. They could have asked Jesus directly if they really wanted to know why. No, this rhetorical question, while it was directed at the disciples, only confirmed their arrogance, their repugnance, and their revulsion, and their revolt toward Jesus. Perhaps they justified their disgust and contempt for Jesus, the Pharisees, by quoting in their minds this passage from Psalm 1:1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. How dare he? Doesn't he know what Psalm 1:1 says? He's doing exactly what it says not to do. These unpolished, uneducated, uncouth disciples were probably thinking in their minds, dude, I'm just here for the barbecue, you know? Why are you asking me? I don't know. I just love the baked beans here. You ought to try some. They were kind of caught up, you know? And they were directing to the disciples for the real issue with Jesus, and the disciples are just kind of trying to get through this, right? Well, that's the Inquisition. Let's move on to the indictment. The indictment. This is where Jesus takes care of the situation right here. Because these guys, these Pharisees and these scribes, were looking to come down on Jesus, trying to find something about this guy, and Jesus kind of turns the table on him as he always does. As he always does. So let's look in verse 17. And let's take a moment to look at the setting of these two events and go back just a few verses to verses 6 and 8. Now, some of the Pharisees were sitting there questioning. This is, by the way, the scene going back to the house where the paralytic man was. Okay? So this is the conversation at that time. He says, now some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts. They did not verbalize back at the house with the paralytic man. They were watching Jesus heal and forgive his sins, but in their hearts, in their minds, they were thinking. They had not even voiced their concern. They were questioning in their hearts. And verse 7 of that passage says, why does this man speak like that? That's what they were thinking. They didn't say it. They were thinking that. He is blaspheming. Who could forgive sins but God alone? That's the thought that was going through their minds. And it's interesting, and immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they questioned within themselves, said to them, why do you question these things in your heart? Now, they had never said a word to Jesus. But can you imagine Jesus, knowing their heart, turns and looks directly at them and says, okay, guys, what's your problem? Oh, well, I didn't say anything. No, you didn't say anything, but I know what your mind said. Why do you question this? Now go back to verse 17 of this passage here. And the scribes and the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with the sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, this time they did say something. Even though it kind of sounded like mumbling, they did say something this time. Why does he eat? Notice he still didn't directly talk to Jesus. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? In verse 17, and when Jesus heard it. Now, I could only imagine that in the context of the meal itself, what's going on, the noise level must have been pretty loud. Wouldn't you think? That many people, because it does say many tax collectors and sinners were there. Probably every room in the house was filled up. You've been in situations and the volume level is pretty high and you have to get closer, especially if you're wearing hearing aids, to hear what's being said. What'd you say? And all of a sudden, when they're asking the disciples, they're not yelling at him, they're just asking him, why is he doing this? Kind of rhetorically. They don't really want to know what the disciples have to say. So he asked them, and somehow Jesus heard that. With all this ruckus going on, all this talking and laughing and going on with each other, having fun, that's what Jesus hears. Like bionic ears or something, And I wonder if the crowd got quiet. It says, hold on a minute, I just heard something. And maybe everything was quiet. Conversations perhaps stop. I don't know, I wasn't there, but I can only think it may have gone that way. And he says, when he heard it, over the sounds of the dinner gathering, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who were sick. Here's the indictment. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. He laid the hammer down, okay? The Pharisees were the nail. He was the hammer. In that statement, he just indicted all of them that were there. all the Pharisees and scribes. That's what he said to them. And I wonder what people thought when they heard this statement. Because I'm pretty sure the Pharisees weren't expecting the response. Caught them off guard. They had been talking to the disciples. Why is he doing this? And then Jesus turns his eyes toward those guys. And that's what he says to them. So in Jesus' answer, there's a twofold response. In his answer, there's the implication of what he says to them. And the implication is those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. The implication to that is those who are sick are the ones who need a physician. If you put in parentheses there. And the endowment follows when he says, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, Jesus uses the analogy of a physician-patient relationship to respond to these grumbling scribes and Pharisees. He uses a physical illustration to teach a spiritual lesson. He did it all the time. And the majority of the time, whoever was talking to never got it. They never saw the lesson itself. They couldn't understand what he was trying to say to them, either through parables or other illustrations. So he says this. What does that have to do with what they were asking? They want to know why he's talking and dealing with tax collectors and sinners. What does health have to do with this? Is this guy crazy? I don't get this at all. What's he even trying to say? And Jesus elaborates on it just a little bit. And I think he goes in this direction. A healthy person has no need of a physician. It's common sense, right? I mean, how many of you ever go to the doctor when you're feeling good? You don't. And that's the point that Jesus is trying to drive home. A healthy person, guys, Pharisees, don't have a need of a physician. Well, duh. When Jesus says to them, I came not to call the righteous. Normally, we associate the term righteous as a good thing, right? Because it is a good thing. But that's not the direction that he's taking these guys to. You see here, the use of the term righteous in this context now means to be correct, means to be right, which by implication means you're innocent. If you're right, then you're innocent. In other words, I am not guilty. If you're righteous, you're not guilty. It refers to those who seem to see themselves to be righteous, who pride themselves on their virtues. They have no spiritual health issues. That's how they see it. Spiritually, I'm righteous. I'm not guilty of all this stuff that makes someone unrighteous. I am righteous. I am right. I'm not sick. Now listen closely. Jesus is not confirming that they are spiritually healthy. He's not confirming their spiritual health. He's saying they have misdiagnosed their condition and as such refuse to see, to believe that they are infected with a deadly disease called sin and believe themselves to be in perfect spiritual health. That's what Jesus is calling out. He's not saying when he says, I don't come to call the righteous, like y'all are okay, you're all right, so I'm not going to deal with y'all because you're right. What he's saying is, you guys are so sick, you don't even see it, but the problem is you don't believe you're sick, and so you don't need a doctor. You're not going to go to the doctor. You're not going to listen to what the doctor says because you don't see yourself as sick. You don't see yourself infected with sin. So why? Why would I waste my time? I'm trying to tell you otherwise because you're not going to listen. It's not a confirmation that they are righteous. It's a confirmation that they are deathly ill. A physician can only help a patient who knows he's sick. In the passage this morning, as I kind of wind things down here, there are two groups of people that are identified, aren't there? Tax collectors and sinners, those bad guys. And you get the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Two groups of people. They are the self-righteous and the unrighteous. That's who's there. And it forces us to consider this sobering question. So everyone listen closely, okay? Because we're in one of those two groups. We're in one of those two groups. Is it better to be self-righteous or unrighteous? Think about it. Is it better to be self-righteous or unrighteous? Jesus has a thought on that. Because according to Jesus, one group has hope. The other group doesn't. They're not going to go to the doctor. They see nothing wrong with themselves. One group has hope, the other one does not. One group admits to health issues. They heard the gospel message of Jesus, the good news of what he's been telling people in his teaching. They were listening to him. They have hope for their condition. They knew that their life was not right. They recognized that they were unethical in their business dealings to get money from their own people. They knew. And they wanted to do something about it because they wanted to hear what Jesus said, which indicates that they were interested in being healed. They want to change. They don't like the path that they're on. They know something's wrong, but they can't put their finger on it. I need a doctor to take an x-ray to tell me what's wrong so I can get something taken care of. One group admits health issues, one group denies health issues. They're the good guys who take the sick guys to the doctor while the good guys sit in the lobby thinking nothing wrong, and the guy's back there with the doctor who really needs to help. He's getting help. The other guy thinks, I'll just wait in the waiting room. Nothing wrong with me. Which group are you in? It's a fair question, isn't it? Which group are you in? Do you see your life as a good life? I do good things. I don't go out and do all this other stuff that everybody else does. So I don't see myself in light of being spiritually ill because I don't do those things. I don't live that way. Or you're going to be sitting here and in your heart, I'm sick as a dog. I just don't know how to get it taken care of. Well, the theme of the Gospel of Mark that Colton has been working through is the goodness of God. So I want to ask you a question. Where does the goodness of God fit into this scenario? You back off the text a little bit, and you see where it's going. You see what the conversation has happened. You see what Jesus has done with Matthew, and perhaps all those tax collectors that were there responded to the call of Jesus. And they saw and they witnessed how he handled the Pharisees that questioned and saw the distinction between the two groups. Well, where does the goodness of God fit into this? Well, I would say this, number one, that we have a God who loves to hang out with sick and unregenerate people. That's a good thing. It was good for me when I was sick that he hung around me. No, not literally, of course. But his presence was there with me when I was rebelling in my heart against him. He was there because he's good. Because he's good. And he provides the opportunity even this morning to heal our brokenness and set our feet on a new path to a new life for all eternity. Another observation, the last one about the goodness of God in this. For those of us who are spiritually sick this morning, there is a physician in the house. There is a physician in the house, by the way, who has never lost a patient. Never lost a patient. That has the right diagnosis for our problem and offers the treatment needed. We'll do what the treatment is. I've been through it. I've been through the treatment. It's an open heart surgery with a complete blood transfusion. That's what it is. I've laid on that table when Jesus took my heart that was corrupted with sin, took it out, and put a new heart, and gave me a blood transfusion through his blood. And I was healed. I was healed. I can stand before you this morning and say that with all honesty, that I know my life has been changed. Perhaps some of you need to lay on that table. Trust the physician saying, here's your condition. I see it, and I can remedy that problem. But you got to put it in my hands. And this is what it's going to take. Changed heart, new blood transfusion. He can do that for you. I hope that some of you are not sitting there thinking, I don't have a problem. Nothing wrong with me. Well, then I will say to you what Jesus said to them. Go on your way. You don't need any help. You're that righteous, you just go on. Don't bother to come around me because you don't need me. One of those two groups. So as we kind of wind things down and we kind of prepare for communion, I just want you to kind of think of those things in your heart this morning. Where are you in that? I would love to be in Matthew's house, being one of those tax collectors and listen more to Jesus, rather than being the Pharisees and the scribes. They weren't looking to celebrate Jesus. They were looking to condemn Jesus. But he's the great physician. He's the great physician. Where's your heart today? Where's your heart today?